Hey everyone, Michael Alm here. So this week I'm working on a jig, and the purpose of this jig is to make repeatable tapered spindled legs on the table saw. Traditionally this kind of leg would be made on a lathe, but I don't have a lathe in my shop and a lot of people don't have lathes either. So I've designed this jig to be very simple to build, pretty quick to build, but also be robust enough to use multiple times. It's adjustable so you can change the angle of the taper. It's also adjustable so you can change the length of the leg. It's built with things that you can buy at a local hardware store. It's pretty simple, so let's get into it. These are all the parts that you'll need throughout the build. There is a piece of 26 by 13 by 3/4 inch plywood, on top of which we will need a 24-inch length of T-track with a couple of screws to secure it down, 2 thumb screws, 2 corresponding T-nuts, 1/4 20 by 2-inch bolt, 1/4 inch T-nut, 1 nylon bushing, a 7/16 socket, a corresponding adapter to use the socket on a drill, a nail, a 1/2 inch dowel, and various pieces of hardwood throughout the build. I'll call out those dimensions as we need them. So I decided to narrate this one because there's just a lot of details to this jig, and I want to make sure that if people do try out this jig, they use it safely. We'll just start off talking about safety because it's obvious that any home-built jig is at the user's risk. So just be careful out there, build it as close to spec as you can, and if you don't feel comfortable with jigs like this, that's fine. Maybe this isn't the right one for you, or maybe you need to build up to it. So started off by making a whole bunch of parts, and these we'll need 4 of these blocks, and the first one we're going to use as the tailstock for it's actually the plate that the tailstock mounts to. You drill out the hole with a 1/2 inch Forstner bit, and I'll shout out all the measurements on the screen, and then you want to set up to drill out some countersunk holes. These countersunk holes secure it to the body of the main panel of the jig, and they are set 5/8 back and 3/8 over on each side. I thought it looked like Mr. Bill. Oh no! So that gets secured to the jig on the back right corner of the panel, just using 1-inch drywall screws for this. So we're gonna make the top of the tailstock with a piece that's 1 by 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Cross cut that block. This is 1.5 inch cut right here, and then you want to measure to the center. So I just connect the corners and find the center like that, and then I use a scratch awl to indicate the center so that my drill has a way to find it. The hole is also a 1/2 inch hole. It's for 1/2 inch dowel, and you go down about 3/4 of an inch and make sure your dowel fits nice and tight. And then I used one of those extra blocks, which we'll use later, as a measuring guide because I know it's the same thickness as that block that I just put down on the sled. So you cut that dowel to length and then glue it into place. And then this is the smaller face of that block, and measuring out the center and measuring down so that the height is set to the height of the spindle. So wherever this is set is basically where your spindle rotates from. It's the central axis. Mark it with a scratch awl again, and then we're gonna drill it out. One thing that I don't show here is that I drilled it out first with an 1/8 inch bit and then with a bit that's slightly smaller than an 1/8 inch because I found that the shank of the nail that I'm securing in was a little bit smaller than 1/8 inch. So this makes sure that it's really nice and tight when it gets hammered in. So this then gets secured down to the sled itself, and I like to countersink a screw from the top so that I can find my mark, and then put the countersink in from the bottom. We're going to screw it in from the bottom, and this is to prevent that block from twisting around too much, and also it stops it from lifting up by chance, like from the saw blade moving around. Secure that with an 1.25 inch wood screw, and then we can flip that over, and your tailstock's basically done then. It's a very simple thing. It has a little bit of rotation so that when you change the angle, it can rotate. Now we're gonna move on to the headstock, and the headstock starts off with a little shuttle that I made out of 1x4 material. And then I just use the T-track as a guide to set the depth. So I've set that for both my blade height and for the depth of cut. It's 2 passes to make the rabbet. And once that's made, set it on and test it to make sure that it slides really nicely and is nice and even with that T-track. Next, we're going to start drilling out the holes for the T-nuts. These are drilled out with a 5/16 inch drill bit. It's a little bigger than 1/4 inch, so it gives you plenty of room for them to slide through. And then I'm going to make a little relief cut here on the shuttle. It's a 2 inch by 2 inch square, and this just kind of extends the range that the sled can hold. It adds another 2 inches to the length of leg that you can use. Now, using those little parts that we cut out at the very beginning, I make a witness mark with the nail set into place on top of the shuttle, and then tape together the 3 blocks. I'm just using double stick carpet tape on here. It's super handy. And then I drill out those sections with a 1/4 inch drill bit, and I'm using a brad point bit with this, and I only drill through the first 2. The bottom one I only just kiss with the drill bit, and that leaves a little mark there so that I'm nice and centered with the rest of the holes. The center one, the one that at the bottom, is going to become the center one, and it will contain a 1/4 inch bushing. So it's a 1/4 inch interior diameter, 1/2 inch exterior diameter. So I'm going to use a 1/2 inch drill bit to drill a through hole all the way through that part. Next, I can slot the nylon bushing into place, and it's a nice snug fit. I actually have to use a persuader to get it to seat completely, and then I can glue it up. I use the bolt as a alignment pin, and then glue all of them together, and then clamp them up with these little Irwin clamps that I've had for years. Super handy for this kind of thing. Now, I lost a little bit of footage here, but this is the same part. I'm just cutting out a little relief area so that the screws have a place to land, so I don't have to use really long screws through this. So again, I'm using carpet tape, and I'm just going to secure the shuttle to the little bearing, I guess you'd call it, and then drill and countersink holes all the way down and through into the shuttle. This part gets secured with 1 1/4 wood screws, and make sure it's nice and tight to the shuttle. And now we can install the T-nuts. So I got these off of Rockler's website, and I got the T-track there as well. I'll post links to everything that, all the parts that I'm using in the description down below. So if you want to pick up anything, check down there. So now I can secure the T-track to the body of the sled, and I use the shuttle as kind of a guide so that I can square it up. I want this hole is basically the pivot point for the T-track, and so I want that to sit right at the front edge of the tailstock. Secure that down, and then you can slide the shuttle up and square that up. With this square, this is at 0 degrees, so it's essentially a dowel maker at this point. If you want to add degrees to it, all you do is unscrew that screw and screw it in a little bit further over. It'll kind of create an arc, and you can add 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees, however many you want for your leg. So the next element to make for the sled is the runner, and I had some maple that was already milled up for runners. I just had to cut it to thickness. So I cut it to thickness, and you actually want to make this a little bit shy of the depth of your slot, and then you can shim it up to the height. That way it never bottoms out and you don't get any rocking out of the sled. I set the sled up against the saw blade with the saw blade fully extended, and then mark the location for the runner. I countersink the runner on the other side, flipping it over, and then secure it with 3/4 inch wood screws. I used 4 on my runner. You can slot it into place and test the fit, and then next step is to just make a handle. I traced the push stick that I like to use. I recommend you do that in your shop because it's something that you're used to holding on to, and then cut it out on a bandsaw. Just made this out of a chunk of cedar I had laying around. It was nice and wide, and then shaped it with my belt sander. I drew a center line on the handle and then countersunk 2 holes on the top of it, and then I could secure it down to the sled. I may have made it a little more elaborate than I needed to, but it sure is comfortable. And with that, the sled's done.
So now I can show you how to use it. So I'm starting out with a piece of 1.5 by 1.5 by 20-inch oak, and I'm finding the centers and drilling those out on the top and bottom. On the bottom side, you want to use an 1/8-inch drill bit and drill all the way down in at least the depth of however far your nail is sticking out. And then on the top, you want to use a 5/16 drill bit and drill down deep enough so that the T-nut can sit all the way in. You hammer that T-nut into place, making sure it's nice and centered, and then you're ready to secure it to the jig. You start by securing the end with the nail in it, the tail end, and then slide in the bolt on the shuttle side. This is a 2-inch 1/4-20 bolt, and using a 1/4-20 nut, you slot that in. This is going to be your lock nut. You start to thread the leg into place, and then once you have max threads, you can lock the nut into place, and it's not going to go anywhere now. Now secure your thumb screws and test to make sure that it spins freely. Before you spin it into the blade, you need to cut off the corners of the piece. I used a scrap piece of pine cut at a 45-degree angle and some shims to make sure that it's locked into place. Raise the blade of the table saw all the way up and get ready to make your first cuts. You're going to want to make 4 of these cuts, cutting off all of the main corners, and it's going to make it a lot easier to spin the spindle into the blade. It's a little awkward to do, and it takes a little bit of time to set this each time, and every time you pull that out, it's actually going to be a little bit smaller, so you're going to constantly be shifting the shims, but as long as you've got a thick enough block to secure it, you should be just fine. Now that those are all cut off, this is the fun bit. You get to drive the spindle through the saw, and it is so fun to watch this. I can't tell you. This is at actual speed. I didn't speed this footage up at all. You can really plow through this material and you get a beautiful finish. I'm using about a 40 tooth per inch blade, and the finish on it was incredible. I haven't sanded this at all yet. You of course can sand it by running sandpaper underneath it. Once you've put away the saw blade and everything, you can sand it up really nice, but even without sanding, it came out beautifully.
All right, so there it is. That is the jig, and I'm thrilled with it. It works great. It's able to batch out legs like crazy. I was able to get these 4 legs out within like 30 minutes or so. I did another experiment of just like doing 5-inch legs. So you can see these walnut legs are 5 inches, and they have different degrees on them. So one is 0 degree, 1 degree, 2 degree, and 3 degree, and you can get all those out of this jig by just altering the angle at the top. The other thing I want to make sure you guys know is that this is removable for a reason. This is the tailstock, and it determines the width of the foot. So I made a bunch of these, and you just shift the nail over back and forth. I asked some people on Instagram what they worried about with this jig from safety standpoint, and the biggest concern was the nail in this block. You can reinforce it with epoxy if you feel like it's necessary. You should probably check this, make sure it's not loosening up. Keep an eye on that. It's also a good reason why you should make multiple of these. I don't have plans for this jig as of yet. I'm probably gonna start working on those, but for now, I'm gonna pop the SketchUp file onto my website, and you can pick that up for a couple of bucks. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, because the next video to come out, I'm gonna be using these legs and this chunk of wood right here to make something. I'm really excited about it. It's gonna be an awesome build. So stick around for that. I also wanna thank my Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. You help me buy supplies. You help me just do this, and that's the best thing ever. If you want to join my Patreon, there's a link down in the description below as well. Got any questions? Leave them down below. Other than that, I think that's it. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.